They sold my house while I was in the hospital.
You
They
won't get
forgot
away
who
with
held the
this.
deed.
Just
Chapter
come with
1,
us, ma'am.
The hospital
You
bed.
brought this on yourself.
A
Goodbye.
house is never just a collection of wood, bricks, and concrete. If you build it with your own 2 hands, it becomes a living, breathing testament to your entire life. My name is Arthur, and for 45 years, I worked as a master carpenter in a quiet suburb of Chicago. I spent my youth coming home with splintered fingers, an aching back, and lungs full of toxic sawdust. But every single drop of sweat was worth it, because I was building a sanctuary for my beautiful wife, Mary, and our only daughter, Harper. I poured the foundation myself, framing every wall and sanding every oak floorboard until it gleamed like glass. When Mary passed away a decade ago, that house became the only piece of her I had left to hold on to. I promised her on her deathbed that I would never leave the home we built together, and I fully intended to keep that promise until my last breath. I thought my daughter Harper understood the deep, sacred value of our family home. I gave that girl absolutely everything she ever asked for, sacrificing my own retirement savings to pay for her expensive out-of-state college tuition. But as Harper grew older, the sweet, grateful little girl I raised slowly vanished, replaced by a cold, deeply materialistic woman. Her transformation became complete the day she married Nolan. Nolan was a slick, arrogant day trader who wore suits he couldn't afford and constantly talked about his next big crypto investment. He looked down on my calloused hands and my faded flannel shirts, completely oblivious to the fact that honest, hard labor was the only reason his wife had a trust fund to drain. Whenever they came over for Sunday dinners, they didn't look at my home with love or nostalgia. They looked at the sprawling backyard, the updated kitchen, and the prime location with hungry, calculating eyes. I caught Nolan more than once tapping on the walls, loudly estimating the property value as if I were already dead and buried. I tried to ignore their blatant greed, blindly hoping that family loyalty would eventually outweigh their desperate thirst for luxury. I was horribly, dangerously wrong. The nightmare truly began on a freezing Tuesday evening in late November. I was out in my backyard workshop, carving a wooden rocking horse for a charity auction, when a sudden, crushing weight slammed into my chest. It felt like a massive iron anvil had been dropped directly onto my ribs, stealing every ounce of oxygen from my lungs. I collapsed onto the sawdust-covered floor, my vision blurring into a terrifying, tunnel-like darkness. The last thing I remember before passing out was the distant, wailing siren of an ambulance piercing the cold night air. When I finally opened my eyes again, I wasn't in my cozy, familiar bedroom. I was trapped in a sterile, blindingly white hospital room, completely hooked up to a terrifying array of beeping monitors and plastic tubes. A grim-faced doctor informed me that I had suffered a massive, near-fatal widowmaker heart attack. I had been in a medically induced coma for over 3 excruciating weeks, just so my fragile body could survive the extreme trauma. As I lay there, weak and completely helpless, the door slowly pushed open, and Harper walked in with Nolan trailing closely behind her. Any normal daughter would have rushed to her father's bedside, weeping tears of joy that he had miraculously survived against all odds. But Harper didn't cry, and she certainly didn't run to hug me. She stood rigidly at the foot of my bed, clutching her expensive designer handbag, looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as profound disappointment. "You're awake," she stated flatly, her voice completely devoid of any warmth or relief. Nolan stood behind her, nervously checking his glowing smartwatch, clearly annoyed that he had to be in a hospital instead of a high-end steakhouse. "The doctors said you were probably going to." "Well, they said it didn't look good," Harper mumbled, avoiding my tired, confused gaze. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw and burning from the breathing tube that had just been violently removed. I'm still here, sweetie," I managed to croak out, forcing a weak, trembling smile. Instead of holding my hand, Harper exchanged a very quick, incredibly dark look with her husband. It was a fleeting glance, but it sent a terrifying, icy chill straight down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with my failing heart. "We need to talk to the head nurse about the long-term care facility," Nolan whispered loudly to Harper, completely ignoring the fact that I was conscious and listening. "This changes the entire timeline we agreed on." Harper quickly shushed him, plastering a fake, sickeningly sweet smile onto her perfectly manicured face. "You just rest, Dad. We are taking care of absolutely everything," she lied smoothly, slowly backing out of the hospital room. As the heavy door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone in the deafening silence of the ICU, a horrible realization began to settle in my gut. They weren't at the hospital to pray for my miraculous recovery. They were waiting for me to die, and my unexpected survival had just ruined their sinister, greedy plans. I didn't know it yet, but while I was fighting for my last breath on a ventilator, my own flesh and blood had already begun to systematically dismantle my entire life. Chapter 2: The Empty House. The next 3 weeks of my life were a slow, agonizing crawl through physical therapy and crushing loneliness. I was transferred from the intensive care unit to a sterile, depressing rehabilitation center on the other side of the city. Every single day, I pushed my broken body to its absolute limits, learning how to walk again with a heavy aluminum frame. I endured the excruciating pain for one simple reason. I just wanted to go back to my beautiful home, sit in my favorite leather armchair, and feel my late wife's comforting presence. But as the days slowly turned into weeks, the silence from my own family became completely deafening. Harper didn't come to visit me a single time. Whenever I called her phone, it would ring endlessly before clicking over to a cold, automated voicemail. On the rare occasions she actually texted me back, it was always a pathetic, transparent excuse. She claimed Nolan was stressed about the stock market, or that she was simply too busy dealing with my medical insurance paperwork. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, desperately clinging to the illusion that I had raised a good, caring daughter. But a dark, nagging intuition in the back of my mind told me something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. By my 4th week in the rehab center, the cheap hospital gowns were irritating my sensitive skin, and I desperately needed my own clothes. More importantly, I wanted the framed photograph of Mary that sat on my bedside table, just to give me the strength to keep fighting. Since my daughter was conveniently unreachable, I swallowed my pride and called my oldest friend, a retired mechanic named Thomas. Thomas didn't hesitate for a single second. He drove his rusty, reliable pickup truck straight to the facility, helped me into the passenger seat, and drove me toward my neighborhood. As we turned onto my familiar, tree-lined street, a warm wave of comfort finally washed over my tired soul. I closed my eyes, eagerly anticipating the sight of the beautiful oak porch I had built with my own 2 hands. But when Thomas slowly pulled the truck into my driveway, the engine idling loudly in the quiet afternoon, my heart completely stopped. I didn't feel a wave of comfort anymore. I felt a violent, sickening punch straight to my gut. There was a massive, rusted industrial dumpster sitting right in the middle of my pristine driveway. "Arthur, what the hell is going on here?" Thomas whispered, staring through the windshield in absolute shock. I couldn't speak, my trembling hands gripping the dashboard as I stared at the absolute destruction of my entire life. Sticking out of the top of the filthy dumpster was the floral reading chair that Mary used to sit in every single evening. Next to it were my expensive, vintage carpentry tools, tossed aside like worthless pieces of garbage. But what truly broke me, what brought hot, stinging tears to my old eyes, was a shattered wooden picture frame resting in the dirt. It was the wedding portrait of me and Mary, the glass violently cracked directly across her beautiful, smiling face. I shoved the truck door open, ignoring the sharp pain shooting through my chest, and stumbled toward the front porch. I reached into my pocket with shaking fingers, pulling out the heavy brass key I had carried for over 40 years. I slid it into the deadbolt of the front door, desperately praying that this was all just a terrible, confusing misunderstanding. The key didn't turn. I pulled it out and looked closer, realizing that the intricate brass lock I had installed myself was completely gone. It had been replaced by a cheap, generic silver deadbolt, and a heavy, metallic real estate lockbox was hanging aggressively from the doorknob. I pressed my face against the cold glass of the front window, peering into the living room that used to be filled with warmth and memories. It was completely, utterly empty. The handmade bookshelves, the antique dining table, the Persian rugs, everything had been ruthlessly stripped away, leaving nothing but bare walls and echoing silence. They hadn't just thrown away my precious memories. While I was lying in a coma, fighting for every single breath, my daughter and her greedy husband had completely cleared out my home. They had changed the locks, thrown my life into a dumpster, and prepared the property for a quick, brutal sale. Thomas walked up behind me, gently placing a supportive hand on my trembling shoulder. "Do you want me to call the police, Arthur?" he asked, his voice thick with suppressed anger. I stood there on the porch, the cold winter wind biting through my thin jacket, staring at the lockbox that was keeping me out of my own home. A weak, pathetic man would have collapsed right there on the welcome mat and cried. A foolish man would have called his daughter, screaming and begging for an explanation that would only be filled with lies. But I wasn't weak, and I certainly wasn't foolish. The deep, agonizing sorrow in my chest instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying, and highly calculated fury. "No, Thomas," I said, my voice completely steady and chillingly calm. "Don't call the police just yet. Take me back to the rehabilitation center, because I have a very important phone call to make to a man named Mr. Sterling." Harper and Nolan thought they were incredibly smart, striking while I was vulnerable and defenseless. But they were about to find out that a master carpenter always measures twice before making a final cut. Chapter 3: The Fake Signatures. I sat in the quiet, sterile corner of the rehabilitation center, holding a borrowed cell phone with trembling hands. I didn't call my daughter to scream, cry, or demand pathetic answers that would only be filled with lies. Instead, I spent the next 3 days quietly gathering every single piece of evidence I needed to completely destroy them. Through my own discreet inquiries, I would later learn the exact, sickening details of how my own flesh and blood pulled off their despicable heist. While I was lying in a coma, kept alive by humming machines, Harper and Nolan were busy raiding my private home office. They broke the lock on my heavy steel filing cabinet, desperately searching for my life insurance policies and bank statements. They were looking for a quick payout, assuming I would be dead before the end of the week. But what they found instead was an old, unsigned power of attorney form I had printed out years ago and completely forgotten about. For a greedy, manipulative man like Nolan, that blank piece of paper was like winning a massive, untraceable lottery jackpot. He easily convinced my daughter that I was never going to wake up, and even if I did, I would just be a useless burden. So Harper sat at the very dining table I built for her mother, and she practiced forging my signature. She traced my handwriting over and over again, completely erasing my autonomy and my life's work with every stroke of her expensive pen. Armed with a fraudulent document and a fake notary stamp Nolan bought online, they approached a shady, fast-cash real estate investment firm. They didn't even try to get the actual fair market value for the beautiful home I had spent 4 decades perfecting. They listed it for a fraction of what it was truly worth, demanding a rapid, all-cash closing within 14 days. The greedy real estate investors didn't ask any difficult questions when they saw the desperate, rock-bottom price tag. They handed over a massive cashier's check, and just like that, Harper and Nolan illegally liquidated my entire existence. And what exactly did my daughter do with the hundreds of thousands of dollars she stole from her dying father? She didn't put a single dime into a savings account to help pay for my mounting, astronomical medical bills. She didn't even bother to pay the overdue property taxes or settle the minor debts I had left behind. Instead, she immediately went on a disgusting, unhinged spending spree to fund the luxury lifestyle she always felt she deserved. Nolan dumped a massive portion of the stolen cash into a highly volatile, offshore cryptocurrency exchange. He actually believed he was a financial genius, completely ignoring the terrifying fact that he was playing with stolen, federally tracked money. Harper bought a brand new, fully loaded electric SUV, paying for it entirely in cash just so she could brag to her superficial friends. They were popping expensive champagne on a rented luxury yacht, celebrating their newfound, ill-gotten wealth while I was learning how to walk again. They genuinely thought they had committed the absolute perfect, untraceable crime. They believed that I was just a weak, confused old man who would eventually be shoved into a cheap, state-run nursing home. They assumed I wouldn't have the physical strength, the financial resources, or the mental capacity to fight back against their legal forgery. But their entire arrogant, flawless plan relied on one massive, catastrophic assumption. They assumed that the dusty, outdated deed they found in my filing cabinet was the actual, legally binding document for the property. They assumed that I was just a simple, uneducated carpenter who didn't understand how modern real estate law and asset protection worked. But a man who spends his entire life measuring angles and building deep foundations knows exactly how to protect his most valuable assets. I finally dialed the private number for Mr. Sterling, the senior partner at the most prestigious estate law firm in downtown Chicago. The phone rang twice before his crisp, highly professional voice answered on the other end. "Arthur, it is a profound relief to finally hear your voice," Mr. Sterling said, his tone reflecting genuine, warm concern. "I was deeply worried when the hospital informed me about your sudden, severe cardiac event." "I'm still breathing, Richard," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as polished steel. "But we have a very serious, very urgent situation regarding the property on Elm Street." I explained exactly what I had seen in the driveway and how my own daughter had illegally cleared out the house and changed the locks. I could hear the furious, rapid clicking of his keyboard as he immediately pulled up the county's public real estate transfer records. "My God, Arthur," Richard whispered, his usually calm, stoic voice laced with absolute, unadulterated shock. "They actually filed a forged power of attorney and executed a fraudulent quitclaim deed to a shell company 3 days ago." "They think they sold it," I said, a dark, humorless smile slowly creeping across my weathered face. "They think they walked away with the cash, and they think I have absolutely nothing left to fight them with." "Well," Richard replied, the sharp, predatory tone of a ruthless corporate lawyer finally emerging from the silence, "they are about to learn a very brutal, very expensive lesson about the true, unbreakable nature of a blind trust." Chapter 4: The Hidden Truth. The next morning, I sat in the private, soundproof conference room of Sterling and Associates, sipping a cup of black coffee. My chest still ached from the surgery, but the fiery, burning adrenaline pumping through my veins masked the physical pain completely. Richard Sterling sat across from me, laying out a thick, heavy stack of highly classified legal documents on the polished mahogany table. "Harper and Nolan are incredibly foolish, Arthur," Richard said, shaking his head as he reviewed the fraudulent paperwork they had filed. "They genuinely believed that finding an old, unsigned deed in your filing cabinet gave them the ultimate power to sell your home." I leaned back in my chair, a cold, satisfied smirk slowly spreading across my weathered face. "They always thought I was just a simple, uneducated man who only knew how to swing a hammer," I replied softly. What my greedy daughter and her arrogant husband didn't know was that 3 years ago, I had made a very quiet, very brilliant legal move. After Mary passed away, I noticed how aggressively Nolan started asking questions about my finances and the rising property value of the house. I saw the terrifying, hungry look in my daughter's eyes whenever she complained about her massive credit card debt. I knew, deep down in my gut, that the absolute second my mind or body started to fail, they would swoop in like starving vultures. So I secretly hired Richard Sterling to construct an impenetrable legal fortress around the only thing I truly cared about. I officially transferred the absolute ownership of my home, along with all of my significant financial assets, into an irrevocable blind trust. For those who don't understand complex estate law, An irrevocable blind trust is exactly what it sounds like. Once the assets are placed inside, they are legally locked away, completely out of my direct, personal control. More importantly, the trust is managed entirely by an anonymous third-party corporate trustee, in this case, Richard's elite law firm. I was no longer the legal owner of the house on Elm Street. The trust was. Therefore, the dusty, outdated deed Harper found in my home office was nothing more than a worthless, nostalgic piece of scrap paper. Because the property belongs to the trust, your daughter's forged power of attorney is entirely, legally void, Richard explained, tapping his expensive pen on the table. You cannot grant someone the power to sell an asset that you do not personally own. The real estate firm that bought the house didn't do a proper, thorough title search because they were blinded by the desperate, rock-bottom cash price. They essentially handed hundreds of thousands of dollars to Harper and Nolan for absolutely nothing. I looked down at my calloused hands, feeling a strange, heavy mixture of profound sadness and absolute, undeniable victory. My own flesh and blood had eagerly committed multiple federal felonies just to throw me away and steal my life's work. So, what is our next move, Richard? I asked, my voice devoid of any lingering, foolish paternal mercy. Do we immediately contact the authorities and halt the illegal transaction? Richard leaned forward, a sharp, highly calculated glint appearing in his cold, professional eyes. We could, he said slowly, choosing his words with absolute, lethal precision. If we report the fraud today, the bank will freeze the funds, the real estate firm will get their money back, and Harper will likely face a minor, slap-on-the-wrist probation charge. He paused, letting the heavy, uncomfortable silence fill the luxurious conference room. But if we wait just a little bit longer, Arthur, if we let them actually spend the stolen money? I instantly understood exactly what he was implying, and a dark, terrifying thrill shot straight down my spine. If we stopped them now, it was just an attempted, clumsy fraud. But if we let them buy their expensive cars, fund their lavish vacations, and dump the cash into untraceable crypto markets, the crime escalates massively. It becomes grand larceny, aggravated wire fraud, and severe money laundering, crimes that carry mandatory, heavy federal prison sentences. They threw my entire life into a dumpster, Richard, I whispered, staring directly into the lawyer's eyes. They left me to rot in a sterile hospital bed while they popped champagne and celebrated my impending death. I picked up my coffee cup, my hand completely steady, devoid of any weakness or hesitation. Let them spend the money, I commanded, sealing my own daughter's terrifying, inescapable fate. Let them dig the hole so incredibly deep that they will never, ever be able to climb out of it. Richard nodded slowly, a dark, respectful smile appearing on his face as he closed the heavy legal binder with a loud, satisfying thud. As you wish, Arthur, he replied smoothly. We will remain completely silent, and we will let them build their fake, glamorous empire on a foundation of absolute criminal quicksand. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed in a comfortable, private hotel suite funded by my trust, focusing entirely on regaining my physical strength. I didn't call Harper, and she certainly didn't bother to call me. She was too busy living her fake, stolen dream, completely unaware that she was dancing blindly on the edge of a massive, terrifying cliff. And I was the one holding the sharp, heavy scissors, just waiting for the perfect moment to cut the rope. Chapter 5, The Desperate Plea. Patience is a virtue that most young, greedy people completely lack. But when you have spent your entire life as a master carpenter, you know that waiting for the glue to dry is the most critical part of the job. For 3 agonizing but necessary weeks, I sat in my luxury hotel suite, focusing entirely on my physical rehabilitation. I lifted weights, walked miles on the treadmill, and ate perfectly portioned meals to rebuild the muscle I had lost in the hospital. I was preparing myself not just for a physical return, but for an absolute, undeniable show of strength. While I was busy rebuilding my body, Harper and Nolan were incredibly busy destroying their entire future. Richard Sterling had hired a team of elite private investigators to track every single penny of the stolen real estate funds. The daily reports I received were a sickening, mind-boggling display of pure, unadulterated greed and absolute stupidity. Harper had immediately marched into a high-end luxury dealership and purchased a fully loaded, electric Porsche SUV in straight cash. She followed that up with a massive $50,000 shopping spree at designer boutiques, completely revamping her wardrobe for her new, fake, wealthy lifestyle. Nolan, completely blinded by his own arrogant delusions of grandeur, wired over $200,000 to an unregulated, offshore cryptocurrency exchange. He actually posted a disgusting, bragging video on his social media, smoking an expensive cigar and claiming he was a self-made financial genius. They were dining at 5-star Michelin restaurants, booking a month-long luxury vacation to the Maldives, and completely ignoring the father they left to rot in a rehab center. They didn't just cross the legal line, they aggressively sprinted miles past it into the dark, terrifying territory of severe federal crimes. By spending the illegally obtained funds across state lines and international crypto exchanges, they had officially committed aggravated wire fraud and massive money laundering. The trap wasn't just set anymore. The heavy steel jaws were locked tight, just waiting for the trigger to be pulled. That trigger finally snapped on a crisp, bright Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after I woke up from my coma. I was finishing my morning coffee when Richard walked into my suite, a sharp, predatory smile playing on his lips. "It has officially begun, Arthur," Richard announced, placing a pristine, sealed legal folder onto the glass table. "The shady real estate investment firm that bought your house just tried to pull massive demolition permits from the city county clerk's office." I leaned forward, feeling my heart pound with a steady, powerful rhythm that proved my surgery was a complete success. And I assumed the county clerk had a very interesting response for them. I asked, a dark chuckle escaping my throat. "Precisely," Richard nodded, adjusting his expensive silk tie. The city's automated system immediately flagged the transaction because the county records clearly show the property is permanently locked inside the Sterling Irrevocable Blind Trust. "The investors just realized that the deed they bought from your daughter is a completely worthless, highly illegal forgery. They are currently out over $400,000 in cash, and they are absolutely, violently furious." I could vividly imagine the absolute panic erupting in that sleazy real estate office. They had bypassed standard title insurance to get a cheap, under-the-table deal, and now they were holding the bag on a massive federal felony fraud case. "The investors have already contacted the local police department and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division," Richard continued, his voice dripping with lethal satisfaction. "Warrants are currently being drawn up for Harper and Nolan's immediate arrest, and their bank accounts have just been aggressively frozen by federal authorities." The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. My daughter was currently waking up in her expensive, stolen bed, completely unaware that her fake empire was already crumbling into dust. She was about to try and buy her morning artisan coffee, only to find out that her shiny new platinum cards were entirely worthless. "The police have requested that the legal owner of the property meet them at the house on Elm Street to officially reclaim the premises," Richard said, handing me my heavy winter coat. "The investors are currently there, demanding access to the house they mistakenly believe they own." I stood up, feeling stronger, sharper, and more alive than I had in an entire decade. I wasn't the weak, dying old man they abandoned in the intensive care unit. I was the master of my own destiny, the architect of their absolute destruction, and the rightful king of the castle they tried to steal. "Let's go, Richard," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying, unbreakable authority. "It is time to take my home back, and it is time to watch my ungrateful daughter finally face the brutal, inescapable consequences of her greed." Chapter 6: The Eviction. The drive back to my old neighborhood felt completely different this time. I wasn't a broken, heartbroken old man being driven in a rusty pickup truck by a sympathetic friend. I was sitting in the back of Richard Sterling's sleek, bulletproof Mercedes sedan, escorted by 2 highly trained private security guards. When we finally pulled onto Elm Street, the quiet, suburban peace had been entirely shattered by a chaotic, aggressive scene. 3 heavily marked police cruisers were parked haphazardly on my front lawn, their bright red and blue lights flashing aggressively against the cold morning air. A massive, angry shouting match was happening right on my front porch. 2 slick, greasy-looking men in cheap suits, clearly the shady real estate investors, were screaming at a calm, imposing police sergeant. We paid $400,000 in straight cash for this property. The taller investor yelled, violently waving a crumpled piece of paper in the officer's face. We have a signed quitclaim deed, and we have the absolute legal right to enter this house and begin our demolition. The sergeant didn't even flinch, holding up a heavy, calloused hand to stop the man's frantic screaming. And I am telling you, sir, that the county clerk has officially flagged that deed as a massive, highly illegal forgery, the officer replied sternly. You do not own this house, and if you try to break that lockbox, I will arrest you for breaking and entering. I stepped out of the Mercedes, my heavy winter boots crunching loudly against the frosted driveway. The sudden, imposing arrival of my legal team instantly silenced the screaming investors. Richard Sterling walked confidently by my side, his expensive briefcase clicking open as he approached the tense standoff on the porch. "Good morning, Sergeant," Richard said smoothly, his voice cutting through the freezing air with absolute, terrifying authority. "I am Richard Sterling, the managing trustee of the Sterling Irrevocable Blind Trust, the sole legal owner of this property." He handed a thick, heavily stamped stack of official court documents directly to the police officer. "And this gentleman," Richard continued, gesturing respectfully toward me, "is Mr. Arthur, the primary beneficiary of the trust and the rightful occupant of this home." The 2 investors stared at me, their faces draining of color as they finally realized the catastrophic, life-ruining mistake they had made. They hadn't scammed a helpless old man. They had walked blindly into a massive federal trap set by a ruthless corporate law firm. You're the old guy who was supposed to be in a coma," the shorter investor stammered, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "Your daughter swore to us that you were practically dead, and that she had full legal authority to liquidate your assets." I looked at the desperate, sweating man with absolute, freezing indifference. "My daughter is a greedy, manipulative liar who is currently under federal investigation for grand larceny and wire fraud," I stated clearly, my voice echoing loudly across the quiet street. "And you are a foolish, reckless amateur who handed over $500,000 without doing a basic, mandatory title search." I stepped closer to them, my physical presence completely dominating the porch I had built with my own hands. "Get off my property immediately, before I have my lawyers press charges against you for criminal trespassing." The investors looked at the stern police sergeant, desperately hoping for a shred of legal protection, but the officer simply rested his hand on his duty belt and nodded toward the street. Defeated, humiliated, and completely terrified of losing their money, the 2 men scrambled back to their cheap sports car and sped away in a cloud of dirty exhaust. The sergeant turned to me, a look of genuine, deep respect in his tired eyes. "The house is officially yours to reclaim, Mr. Arthur," he said softly, handing the forged paperwork back to Richard. "We have a locksmith en route to drill out that illegal lockbox and install new deadbolts for you." "Thank you, officer," I replied, feeling a massive, suffocating weight finally lift off my tired shoulders. "But what about the people who actually committed this massive fraud?" The sergeant's face hardened, a grim, highly professional mask slipping into place. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Division took over the primary investigation at 6:00 a.m. this morning," he confirmed, his words sounding like beautiful, heavy music to my ears. "Federal warrants have been fully executed, and agents are currently en route to apprehend Harper and Nolan at their primary residence." I looked up at the empty, bare windows of my beloved home, feeling a strange, heavy mixture of profound victory and deep, undeniable sorrow. I had successfully protected my legacy, my life's work, and the sacred memory of my late wife. But the ultimate, terrifying cost of this victory was the complete, violent destruction of my only child's life. And the absolute worst part was that I didn't feel a single ounce of regret for what was about to happen to her. Chapter 7. The Handcuffs. While I was standing on my quiet, frost-covered porch, reclaiming the sanctuary I had built with my own hands, my daughter was living in a completely different reality. Harper and Nolan were currently residing in a massive, obscenely expensive luxury apartment downtown, completely funded by my stolen money. According to the detailed police reports I read later, they were in the middle of hosting a lavish, catered brunch for their superficial, wealthy friends. They were pouring expensive mimosas, loudly bragging about their sudden, unexplained financial success, and showing off Harper's new diamond jewelry. Nolan was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a crystal glass, arrogantly explaining his fake cryptocurrency investments to a group of gullible guests. They were completely, blissfully unaware that the heavy, inescapable hammer of federal justice was already swinging down toward their heads. At exactly 10:15 a.m., the heavy, reinforced oak doors of their luxury apartment didn't just open, they were violently breached. A specialized team of heavily armed FBI agents, accompanied by local financial crimes detectives, flooded into the massive living room. The loud, aggressive shouts of federal agents, "Get down on the ground," completely shattered the arrogant, fake atmosphere of the party. Guests screamed in absolute terror, dropping their expensive champagne glasses as they frantically scrambled away from the armed officers. Nolan, the cowardly, arrogant day trader who thought he was a criminal mastermind, immediately dropped his crystal glass and wet his expensive tailored pants. He didn't try to protect his wife, and he certainly didn't try to calmly explain the situation to the federal agents. Instead, he violently shoved Harper out of the way, desperately trying to sprint toward the apartment's back fire escape. He didn't even make it 3 steps before a massive, heavily armored federal agent tackled him brutally to the hardwood floor. "Nolan Vance, you are under arrest for aggravated wire fraud, grand larceny, and federal money laundering," the agent barked, aggressively wrenching Nolan's arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the room was the exact sound of their fake empire violently collapsing. Harper, completely paralyzed by absolute shock and terror, stood frozen in the middle of the room, her expensive designer dress trembling violently. She watched in pure horror as 2 female agents approached her, their faces grim and completely devoid of any mercy. "Harper Vance, you are under arrest for forgery, elder financial abuse, and grand larceny," the agent stated coldly, grabbing her wrists. No, wait, this is a massive mistake." Harper suddenly shrieked, the reality of her terrifying situation finally crashing down upon her. "I didn't do anything wrong. The house was in my name. My father gave it to me before he died." She was desperately, hysterically clinging to the pathetic lies she had told herself, completely ignoring the fact that her father was very much alive. "Your father is alive and well, Mrs. Vance," the lead detective said, his voice dripping with absolute, freezing disgust. "And he is currently standing inside the home you illegally tried to sell, alongside the corporate lawyers who actually own the property." The absolute, mind-shattering shock on Harper's face was captured perfectly by the police body cameras. Her knees violently buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing hysterically as the cold steel handcuffs were locked tightly around her wrists. She looked around the room, desperately searching for a single shred of sympathy from her wealthy, superficial friends. But they were all backing away in absolute horror, pulling out their expensive phones to record her humiliating, public downfall. She wasn't a glamorous, wealthy socialite anymore. She was just a pathetic, greedy criminal being dragged out of her own party in front of everyone she desperately wanted to impress. As the federal agents marched them out of the luxury building and shoved them into the back of a heavily armored transport van, Harper finally broke down completely. She wasn't crying because she felt guilty for betraying her dying father or for throwing my life's work into a filthy dumpster. She was crying because she had finally been caught, and she knew her fake, luxurious life was permanently over. Later that afternoon, Richard Sterling's phone rang as we were supervising the delivery of new furniture to my empty house. It was Harper's desperate, frantic public defender, begging for an immediate meeting to discuss a potential plea deal. "She is begging you to drop the charges, Arthur," Richard said, covering the receiver with his hand. "She claims Nolan manipulated her into forging the documents, and she is willing to testify against him if you show her mercy." I looked around my quiet, empty living room, remembering the cold, terrifying silence of that hospital bed when she abandoned me. "Tell her lawyer that the Sterling Irrevocable Blind Trust does not negotiate with federal criminals," I replied, my voice echoing with absolute, unbreakable resolve. "And tell my daughter that she is going to need a very warm coat, because federal prison is incredibly cold this time of year." Chapter 8, The Ultimate Karma. It has been 2 full years since that chaotic morning, when the heavy iron doors of a federal penitentiary slammed shut on my daughter's fake, glamorous life. The highly publicized trial that followed their arrest was a pathetic, miserable display of pure cowardice and absolute betrayal. The absolute second they realized the overwhelming, undeniable mountain of evidence the FBI had gathered against them, Harper and Nolan violently turned on each other like starving wolves. Nolan desperately tried to pin the entire forgery scheme on my daughter, claiming he was just an innocent husband who trusted his wife's legal authority. Harper shrieked hysterically in the courtroom, viciously accusing Nolan of manipulating her and forcing her to steal the money to fund his reckless crypto gambling. The federal prosecutors easily saw right through their pathetic, transparent lies and tore their defense completely to shreds. Nolan was sentenced to 12 brutal years in federal prison for aggravated wire fraud, grand larceny, and international money laundering. Harper, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, wept uncontrollably as the stern judge handed her a harsh, non-negotiable 7-year sentence for elder financial abuse and severe forgery. Even when they eventually finish their sentences and walk out of those cold concrete walls, their lives will be completely, permanently ruined. They are drowning in massive, unpayable restitution debts to the real estate firm they scammed, and they will carry the heavy, inescapable stigma of being convicted federal felons forever. I didn't attend their sentencing hearings, and I have absolutely no intention of ever visiting them behind bars. Instead, I spent the last 2 years slowly, carefully breathing life back into the beautiful sanctuary I built with my own 2 hands. I couldn't recover the original antique furniture they ruthlessly threw into that filthy dumpster, but a master carpenter never loses his ability to create something new. I spent my quiet afternoons in my backyard workshop, the familiar, comforting smell of fresh sawdust filling my healing lungs. I built a brand new, magnificent oak dining table, carefully sanding the heavy wooden edges until they were as smooth as polished glass. I painstakingly repaired the shattered wooden frame that held Mary's wedding portrait, placing her beautiful, smiling face right back on the living room mantel where it truly belongs. The Sterling Irrevocable Blind Trust remains completely intact, managed perfectly by Richard and his elite team of corporate lawyers. I made a permanent, unbreakable amendment to the trust's final execution orders. When my time on this earth finally comes to a natural end, this entire property and all of my remaining assets will be donated to a local charity that builds affordable housing for struggling single mothers. Not a single, solitary penny of my life's work will ever fall into the greedy, entitled hands of my treacherous daughter. People in my neighborhood often ask me if I feel a deep, lingering sadness about sending my only child to a federal prison cell. The honest truth is that the loving daughter I raised died the exact moment she stood over my hospital bed and coldly plotted to steal my home. The woman who forged my signature and threw my precious memories into the trash was just a ruthless, entitled stranger who desperately needed to be taught a brutal lesson. There is a profound, sacred respect that you owe to the people who sacrificed everything to build the foundation you currently stand on. When you allow blinding greed and superficial vanity to replace your basic human decency, you will inevitably lose absolutely everything you thought you were entitled to. Age does not make a person weak, and silence does not mean that a person is defenseless. Sometimes, the quietest people in the room are the ones holding the heaviest, most destructive hammers. Thank you so much for listening to my story today on Dramaverse. If your own child forged your signature and sold your home while you were fighting for your life, would you have shown them any mercy? Or would you let them rot in a prison cell just like I did? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments down below. Please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for more daily stories of ultimate karma and family betrayal.